steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another video. And without further delay, let's jump right in. All right, if you saw the thumbnail on YouTube, I'm going to take a little bit different approach on this one. And instead of doing the traditional deep dive review of the listing that I have been doing for a long time now, we're going to look at what is this car worth? Okay, is this car worth you making the purchase? And I'll talk a little bit about who this car is going to appeal to. So, Bring a Trailer. I have no affiliation to them. This is a LS3 powered, as you can see from the title, 3 Lincoln Continental convertible. Very appealing car. Oftentimes people ask, what's the most desirable 60s Lincoln? What's the most desirable 60s convertible Lincoln? And you're going to get a bunch of different answers from 61, 62, 63, all the way up to 67, of course. 63 is very desirable. There's no doubt about it. There were some minor refinements over 61, 62. And what you get here is this front 3/4 shot. We can see the very, very iconic grille with that, that tapered to that middle point, if you will. And then you've got the 5 vertical bars that you see there across the front. We can see that it has a wider white wall tire that wasn't specific to that year, however, is going to appeal definitely depending on the generation. The old school folks that lived through this era, often say, hey, not a fan of the white walls after 61. But of course, that's personal preference, right? We can see kind of this is the money shot, the top down front 3/4. We can see the factory wheel covers. Now, something to keep in mind on this build is right here in this description right out of the gate as we look at it, is basically saying that if you add up the receipts and you total those, you're going to be at $60,000 in modifications. This is what I'll call like a semi-resto mod. Really, it's a resto mod. But we typically see air suspension and a lot of additional things, but this is definitely a resto mod, okay? It has a 6.2 liter, wait for it, GM LS3 V8, okay? It does have front disc brakes and it has some additional stuff that we'll talk about. Now, when we start to talk about who this car is going to appeal to, I realize there's going to be a ton of people out there that are going to say, hey, it is sacrilegious to put a GM power plant into a Ford Lincoln Motor Company vehicle, right? That is all personal preference. We've been seeing this happen for a while now in the Lincoln community, but if you go back to even the old days, you'd see these old school Fords from the 30s and 40s that had like a Chevy 350, just because a Chevy 350 was simple, right? These LS engines are super powerful. They offer just ease of use, and they kind of eliminate some of the potential challenges that we are faced with these 60 Lincolns. Now, it's not for everyone. So this car is going to appeal to someone that is in their mind, they're going to say, hey, I want an old school, meaning an old school car, but I want a little bit of the modern reliability. Now, I have often said, you do not need to do an engine swap to have reliability, okay? But everybody has a preference. There's folks that watch TV shows. There's people that are, not really car guys, so to speak. There's people that are car guys that just want to, do a resto mod, right? There's all different ways to slice and dice it. But this car, when we look at the breakdown of what the engine swap cost, it easily can reinforce to you, based upon the labor rate where you're at and how quickly a shop works, how expensive it can be. Now, the other appeal to this car is when we look at this paragraph, the car left the factory in ermine white, okay? It was resprayed or repainted in 1986, so we're talking almost 40 years ago, believe it or not, right? The appeal to this car is that you have the look of the 1963 Lincoln Continental convertible. Like, you would walk up to this car at a car show, and other than the white wall tires, for the most part, you're going to just have people oohing and ahhing over the particular car. We look at the interior and we go, okay, well, what can we see? It does have a speaker on the kick panel. That kind of came a little bit later in the 60s, and it didn't necessarily look like this. However, this is very well done. We could see the cup holders In the center console, I have those on my 65 as well, where an interior shop or the owner will basically kind of use a tool to cut those two, and you put like a spun aluminum style boat, if you will, cup holder in there, right? We can see it has some hidden car audio, including a Bluetooth capable device, right? We've got the little hula dancer on the dash, right? Very kind of iconic and reminiscent. I look at the key here. You've got the old style keychain that almost reminds me of like an old motel. Now, here's where the story on this one changes. Is again, you've got a '63 Lincoln Continental that has a new power plant. And the big thing here is when you go with a modern engine, what you're going to end up seeing is you're going to get a different kind of buyer. Okay. And I have said, as I mentioned earlier, you do not need to do an engine swap to have a reliable car. You can take an engine and make sure it's getting fuel and make sure it's getting spark and, do a tune up and kind of eliminate some of those pesky bugs that you could expect from a vehicle that's 60 plus years old. However, there are going to be folks that go, hey, I want to do this, right? I want to have a modern engine. And I will tell you this, I rode in my friend Roberto's 63. It's him and his wife's car. I think technically her car, but it's their car. And I rode in this car, this sedan in September 2022 out at the Raddies event. Shout out to the Raddies. And I can tell you what, when you're inside one of these cars, you can't even tell that it's a different engine, right? And you're going to have folks that are going to go out there and they're going to swap the engine and they're going to drive the heck out of their car, right? Maybe because they're going to feel like it's not going to break down. Could it break down? Absolutely. Anything could break down. But if to me, if somebody is going to do something to one of these vehicles to get it out on the road, whether it's the highway or going to shows and things like that, more power to them. Okay, that's fantastic. Roberto and his awesome wife's car, that vehicle, man, if he doesn't open the hood, nobody knows that it's a GM powered drivetrain. And by the way, cruising around in the car, you would never know. It sounds great, with the right mufflers and or resonators. You would have no clue that, hey, I'm driving in this 63 car. And oh, by the way, it has a modern fuel injected drivetrain. Now, that's one of the other benefits to going fuel injected. People will argue, yeah, you're going to get better performance, but you're also potentially going to get better fuel mileage. Like in my old Lincolns, I'm getting, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11, depending on, I don't know how often I'm on the freeway, but let's call it 10 miles a gallon. You're potentially going to get better fuel mileage. And living out in California, where this plate shows this car is at, and if we scroll up here, we can see, yeah, Santa Maria. That's a big thing when you're paying a lot more for fuel. Okay. Now, there are some videos here. Now, this videos, no matter what orientation they're in, they are better than no videos, right? So I did mute this. What he shows here is basically the hood open, a startup, which is presumably cold startup, gets into the car. And again, the orientation's a little wacky here, which is fine. And it shows the car out driving. Okay. Which is fantastic. There's an interior, a top operation, and a walk around with this as well. When we look at the photos, and we go through these, you're going to see the look and feel, as I stated, of a 63 Lincoln Continental convertible. It's going to appeal to someone that says, hey, I want that old school car, but you know what? I've been thinking about buying one of these, and I know I could get one for 30, 40, 50,000 for a convertible, depending on the condition. And then, oh, by the way, I went to my local hot rod shop. I went to a Devious Customs out in Riverside. I went to one of these places and I asked, hey, what's the timeline based upon your current customers and what's the approximate cost? And when someone gets a jaw-dropping number and they realize, wow, it's going to be X amount to do all of this work, they realize that, hey, I can go after this car and maybe get it for $60,000 or $75,000. Now, I believe this car should sell for at least $75,000. We're going to have to see if it goes above that. When we look at some of the specifics, I love how it has the factory carpet with the heel pad, right? It gives that overall, like if somebody walks up to this at a show, they're not going to know that it kind of is a semi or full resto mod. Also, like if you look at some of these pods, I've talked about this in the past, you can take the quadruple zero steel wool that you can get at your local hardware retailer like an Ace Hardware, and you can get some Brasso polish, and you can clean all of these pods up. It'll kind of take off that almost like clear coat, if you will, and they'll look almost brand new depending on how much time that you spend there. I love that it has the factory radio here. No reason to go and put in a head unit right there. Do what they did. You know, you hide it away in the glove box, under the seat, so on and so forth. When we look at the engine bay, you go, wow, it certainly is not the Mel 430 that we're used to seeing. Absolutely. But if we look there, we can see that it has a dual master cylinder. You've got this fuel injected engine. You have an aluminum radiator. You have a red top battery. You've got a modern alternator up here. You have pretty much all the bells and whistles to make this kind of a modern driver. Now, who this car is not going to appeal to. If you're a purist, or you've always wanted one of these cars and you want a factory, you want the sound of that MEL 430 starting up, and you want something that's factory correct, certainly this car might be fun to look at, but this car, of course, is not for you. We've got some of the wiring here and some of the ECM, if you will. We can see that the air condition is disconnected. I do believe that it does not have AC at this point, based upon what I'm seeing. We can see underneath here, the car overall, to me, is pretty clean underneath from what we can see, which is fantastic. You can see they kind of went and painted all the areas where they've had to do kind of any modifications. We also have, surprisingly, the factory fuel tank. You would have a high pressure fuel system, and that can be added to an old school tank. So it retains even that old school look from behind. Oftentimes, you know, if you've got an aluminum fuel cell, you're going to kind of see that a little bit underneath the rear of the car. You know, in this situation, you won't. The other thing that you get is you've got newer exhaust, right? Now you look at the exhaust and you go, yeah, it may not look perfect. It doesn't look factory correct. That's okay. The main thing is that you've got the new exhaust, because that's going to run you a few grand depending on where you live and if you can do it yourself. We can also see the fuel line looks like aluminum fuel line. I ran these also on my 64, and that would of course all be new to kind of eliminate some of the old stuff there that was underneath it. The underneath the car is not perfect. You know, you've got a little bit of the leftover kind of grit and grime from that old MEL 430, but certainly what we can see here is, to me, this looks way cleaner than most. Like, look underneath this engine. There doesn't appear to be any leaks whatsoever. You know, you're eliminating things that if you took a factory 63 convertible and you took it to a place and you said, hey, I want you to reseal the engine, I want you to make sure everything works, that's going to add up to a lot of money. And this thing, this build, if you will, is kind of bypassing a lot of that. The other thing that I think is appealing for a lot of folks, and I said this earlier, is it does not have adjustable suspension. Now, it does have what they describe like an air shock in the back, which is great. It gives you that little bit of tuning, fine tuning that you may want to do. But a lot of folks might go, hey, I'm good for a modern engine, but I really don't want a car that's laying on the ground. That may not be your cup of tea. And the good thing about this car is it has the stock suspension. If you want to put air suspension on it, by all means you can. I mentioned earlier that it has the factory brakes, or excuse me, it has upgraded brakes. And what we can see here is, yes, it has the front disc. They did update the description to show that it still has the drums in the rear, which is perfectly fine. I drive my 64 with drums in the front and rear, and I've got it dialed in. But in some examples, you know, you'll see it where it's fully upgraded. This one's only upgraded in the front. I just want to spend a moment here. If we look at this, right, we can see $38,452 for the parts and the engine swap. If we look here at this company, they charged 373 hours at $85 an hour, which is more than a fair rate in 2024, especially in California. I've heard rates easily over $100 an hour. The labor alone was, give or take, $32,000. So, in closing, I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think this car will sell for? I can tell you it's not going to be for everyone, but the appeal of this car is that it's a 63, you know, it's got the bones of a 63, right, for the most part. But I've heard people say this, hey, I love the look on the outside of these, you know, these old school cars, but I want to modernize it some. We've seen people like West Coast Customs mash two cars together where they take the, you know, um, the exterior of an old car and, sit it over the body of a newer car, right? Some of those Mopars and things like that. Of course, we don't have to go that far with the Lincoln, but you could see where this would appeal to some folks. Now, if you've looked at Resto Mod Lincolns for 80 and 100,000 plus, you could easily get into this car and be cruising to your heart's content. The other good thing is, let's say you have a challenge and you live in the middle of nowhere and you don't live by a Lincoln expert that doesn't know how to maybe rebuild a steering pump, or the steering pump you ran dry because you forgot to check it, right? And you didn't have any Type F fluid to put in your MEL 430 steering pump reservoir. Well, now you've got a modern engine where you could take it to probably a local mechanic, hopefully that would work on it, and say, oh yeah, your alternators needs to be changed, or this needs to be done. We can go to the parts store and we can buy those things. Same thing with the transmission. Now, I know you're listening to all this and you're thinking, wow, are you telling people to resto mod? Absolutely. I'm telling people to do what's best for you. In my two Lincolns, I love the factory engine. But if you think about what I was about to say a moment ago with the transmission, transmissions are not cheap to rebuild. Depending on where you're at, I've heard some exuberant cost on these old transmissions, okay? If you've got a modern transmission, you could go to GM and say, hey, I want to buy another transmission, have it shipped to you, and then have someone install it, or have a GM install it. Well, maybe not in this car, but you can easily install, and you kind of get the point that I'm making. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. This car is not for everyone, but certainly with the amount of time and money that someone has in it, I think someone's going to get a cool cruiser that looks like a 63 Lincoln, but that's got some upgraded stuff under the hood. ODB, stay on the rise. Much love, and best of luck to the seller. I dig the car. Peace.
Welcome to LA where the players play, and we ride on them things like every day.